Hey there, what you say? I'm Paul Rabelais. I'm an estate planning attorney and I help our clients around Louisiana get and keep their estate legal affairs in order. I'm going to talk today about estate planning 101, and really I'm going to break it down into life's 3 phases that people go through because their estate planning needs change. I'm going to go through it kind of fast, but I'm going to hit all the high points. At the end, I'm going to get you to comment on what phase you're in and what issues are most important to you. So let's just jump right in. Phase 1 for people is that phase, and look, these are very generalities. I realize everybody's circumstances are unique, everybody's different, but there are trends based on where you are in life, and we're going to talk about those trends here today. Phase 1 of the 3 phases is for those people who are typically in their 30s, maybe their 40s. They have kids, but the kids are still minors. Quite frankly, that phase of people in their 30s and 40s, they're just trying to survive. They got kids running all over the place. They're still in the accumulation phase. They really don't think they're going to die, at least not anytime soon. But there's some really important estate planning needs that they have. One of their biggest concerns is who's going to raise our kids if we pass away before they're adults. So parents have the right in their will to designate who can raise their kids. If you don't designate that, then boy, it's a real mess because judges get involved and they get to a point who's going to raise your kids. It's a mess. So parents with minor kids need to take care of that. The other thing they need to take care of is, people tell me, Paul, I have retirement accounts that I'm building. I have life insurance. We have a home. We don't want to dump money on a 13-year-old. And again, if you don't address it, a big mess. Then when minors inherit, a judge has to supervise all of that. A judge has to approve every expenditure for the minor. And then when the minor turns 18, the money just gets dumped into their laps and, bad things happen. So you can address all of that by saying that, if you have minor kids and you do pass away and you're leaving things to your kids, whether it's retirement accounts or life insurance or other assets that you own, it goes into a trust for them where you designate who that trustee is and under what terms can they use the money and when they would get the money, so you can control all of that. Another issue with those people in phase 1, particularly if they're divorced and they have kids, they'll tell me, Paul, I don't want my ex-spouse controlling a penny of my money if I pass away and I leave money to my kid who's a minor. So that's a big issue, particularly if there's been a difficult divorce situation and there's custody issues. So those divorced parents with young kids really need estate planning to make sure that they can control who would handle the inheritance for their children until their children are old enough to handle it for themselves. So those are the primary issues for those people in phase 1 in their 30s and 40s. Now let's go to phase 2, people who are in their 50s and let's say their early 60s. So that group of people in their 50s, their early 60s, most of them are still working, but they've accumulated some assets. And you know what? They're starting to see some friends and colleagues around them getting sick, and some of them have even passed away. And in addition, their parents are passing away. So they're starting to understand all of the issues around estate planning. So people in phase 2, 50s and early 60s, they're starting to address things like, well, what if I get sick, or what if I have a stroke and I can't handle my business or my money or my bills and I can't talk to my doctors? Who do I want doing that for me if I get sick? And then if they're married, it's going to be like, well, I'm in my 50s and 60s, kind of like I am, and if I pass away and leave things to my spouse, boy, my spouse could live another 20 or 30 years and a lot could happen from the time I die until my spouse dies. How do I want to leave it to my spouse? Do I just want to leave ownership of everything to my spouse? And then my spouse might get remarried and just leave all of my estate to my spouse's next spouse. Or if my spouse and I each have children from different marriages and relationships, do I really want to leave everything to my spouse? Because when my spouse gets it, they're not going to leave anything back to my kids. They're going to leave it all to their kids. Or do I leave things to my spouse in a way that if they have needs, that's what it's there for? but when my spouse later dies, or maybe even if my spouse remarries, I want those assets to revert back to my children. So there's those issues for people in phase 2. How do we leave it, or how do I leave it to my spouse? And then another big issue for people in phase 2, again, they're in their 50s and their early 60s. They're likely to have kids that are in their 20s and maybe even their 30s who are, starting to get married. Some of them are getting divorced. And then there's these son-in-law and daughter-in-law issues. So a real important issue for people in phase 2 in their 50s and 60s is children's divorce protection. How do I leave it to my child in a way that if my child gets divorced, they don't have to split it with their spouse if they get divorced? I want it to stay in the bloodlines. I want it for my child and perhaps even for my child's children. So extra precautions are taken often with what we call our children's inheritance trust, so that there's assurance that the children's inheritance is protected from their past, present, or future divorces. So that's a big issue for people in phase 2. Phase 3, now we're getting serious. This is for people who are in maybe their mid to late 60s and in their 70s and then their 80s. You know what? Those folks, they know they're going to die. Everybody knows they're going to die, but people in phase 3, they know what's going to happen. They're retired, they've accumulated assets, and now they're in the mode of we're tired. We've been working our whole lives. We don't want to go through a bunch of stuff when one of us or both, or we don't want our kids to go through a bunch of stuff. We want to make it simple on everybody. So we don't want our kids to have to go through a bunch of red tape. So now the conversations turns often to, avoiding probate and avoiding, when you die with things in your name, your survivors having to hire, quite frankly, lawyers like myself to guide them through a court proceeding just to get access to what you owned. So there's often that avoid probate discussion. So it's let's make it simple. Let's avoid the government interference. And oftentimes people in phase 3, they have accumulated assets and they just merely want to protect them. So they want to protect them from things like they don't want to lose it all to the nursing home if they get sick and they can't stay at home, or their family's not going to be able to take care of them, and they wind up having to go because they've got no other alternative to go into the nursing home. That middle class is worried in phase 3 that they're going to lose their life savings and potentially even lose their home if they get sick and go into a nursing home. So that falls under that. We want to protect what we have. Some people are concerned about protecting it from lawsuits, and then there's taxes that people are worried about. Not necessarily just the federal estate tax, which really only affects people who die and have more than $11.4 million of assets. But for every estate, there's almost always capital gains tax considerations when things get sold. There's always income tax considerations, particularly with things like retirement accounts where there's required distributions that you have to take, and there will be required distributions that your children or grandchildren will have to take. And there's that issue of whether you want to give them the opportunity to cash it all out and pay all the tax at once and blow the money. So there's those issues. And then there's just a whole host of other issues for people in phase 3. There's the blended family issue where we have to talk about prenups or marriage contracts when senior citizens get married and they have children from a prior marriage. There's all of those issues. There's the same issues of how to leave things to each other. There's the issues of some parents have special needs children who are getting government benefits, and if they leave money to that child, the child's government benefits are jeopardized. So leaving it to that special needs trust is often important. Some people in phase 3, they've accumulated assets and they want to leave particular assets to certain people or a certain way. Maybe they feel like the home should go to this child, or maybe they feel like the farm or this kind of emotional property that they have should stay in the family for a number of years. So all of those are issues on those particular assets. And then of course we address all of the life support machine issues with the living wills. Sometimes we have to talk about the personal effects and how a certain vehicle, you know, the old Ford Mustang needs to go to my grandson. Sometimes we see some of that. Yesterday I did a pet trust where a gentleman had a 1-year-old puppy. Not so much a puppy anymore, I guess, but wanting to make sure that money was left to take care of of his dog. And then when the dog later, you know, passed away down the road, then, you know, he would specify how those funds would be divided up. Don't see that a lot, but saw it yesterday. So those are the 3 phases. Phase 1, 30s and 40s, it's about the minor kids, and particularly if there's been a divorce, keeping the ex-spouse away from the money. Who's going to raise the kids, who's going to handle the kids' money until they're older. Phase 2, 50s and early 60s, still working, but boy, if I pass away, how do I leave things to my spouse? And when I leave things to the children, they're just getting married, I want to make sure it's protected in case they get divorced. Whole host of other issues. Phase 3, you're going to die. Let's make it simple. Let's protect what we have. We're not trying to accumulate anymore. We're just trying to protect it and kind of keep the government's hands off of it. So it's all about the nursing home protection, avoid the nursing home poverty. Want to make sure, you know, if some people are worried if they get sued, they don't want to lose anything. Other people, taxes are a consideration, keeping it out of probate. So, and then all those unique family circumstances, that seems like every family has at least one unique family circumstance. And then of course designating who's going to be your power of attorney for financial matters, for medical decisions, who's going to be the executor, and if you have a trust, who's going to be the successor trustee of your trust. So, you know, going through that process of selecting perhaps which children or which family member or family members will be the ones to take certain roles to handle things in the future. Okay, so there you have it, Estate Planning 101 through the 3 phases of life. As you go through life, your needs change, your objectives change, and you need to have a legal program in place that accomplishes those objectives at the right time. You never know, you know, when something may happen. You got to be prepared for it. So what I want you to do now is just a couple of things. One, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, because before you go see a lawyer and pay them thousands of dollars, I want you to be just as informed, if not more informed than the lawyer. And by hitting the subscribe button, I'm going to keep you informed. Give it the thumbs up. That'll really help. And then in the comments below, I'm kind of interested in who's watching these videos. So tell me what phase you're in. Phase 1, 30s and 40s. Phase 2, 50s and early 60s. Phase 3, late 60s, 70s and 80s. And then which of those issues is, you know, name 1 or 2, maybe just 1 of the more important of the issues that I addressed, or maybe one that I didn't even address that is most important to you from an estate planning perspective. And that'll get everybody, you know, talking and chatting and, you know, benefiting from the material that we put out there. Okay, I'm going to get back to work. I'm Paul Rabelais.